So one of the interesting things about a straight six engine, and a lot of diesels out there are straight six. You have the Cummins motors, there's International motors, all sorts of straight sixes out there. A lot of your 18-wheelers over the road, most of them, I'd say about 95% of them are straight sixes. Every straight six, or pretty much every straight six you're ever going to come into encounter with, has the same firing order. It's 153624. Whenever you're adjusting the valves, there is a method called the two-roll method. You put cylinder number 1 on top dead center, and then that allows you to adjust half of the valves, not 3 cylinders, but if you have 2 rockers per cylinder or however many rockers per intake and exhaust, you can adjust half of them at top dead center, roll it 360 degrees, one roll, and then you can adjust the other ones. Now there's a couple of different ways you can accomplish this to roll it over. You can either bump the engine over, you can do it by hand, whichever. The easiest way to do it on a straight six for me is bump it over and watch cylinders number 1 and your companion cylinder, called the rule of 7. So if you're looking for top dead center on cylinder 1, X plus 1 equals 7. So it'd be 6. So when you're trying to get number 1 cylinder top dead center, look at cylinder number 6. When you first see that exhaust valve go down just a little bit, that means that the camshaft doesn't overlap for that cylinder. So if you put your hand on the rocker for cylinder 6, you can feel it the intake will go down as the exhaust valve's closing, and right before the exhaust valve gets all the way up, the intake valve will come down just a little bit, and they're kind of an overlap. Once they're in overlap on cylinder 6 and you can't move the rocker, come up to cylinder number 1 and you were on top dead center. So the way the camshaft works is because that scavenging effect, when the piston is pushing the exhaust out of the cylinder and that exhaust valve comes down, as it gets all the way to the top, the exhaust valve starts to close, but right for a fraction of a second, the intake valve is open just a little bit, and there's a scavenging effect that goes on. If you guys don't know what scavenging effect is, look that up on YouTube. I think Engineering Explained does a fantastic explanation of it. But 2 things about the two-roll method. 1, it was extremely hard for me to remember the 153624. So a very easy way, the way I was taught how to remember it, is just think about it as like the dating world, and you're an adult. 15 years old, a little too young. 36 years old, a little too old. 24, just right. So 15 too young, 36 too old, 24, just right. And if you'll repeat that a couple times, you'll remember 153624. And I have never found one single straight six that does not use that particular firing order. I'm sure there's one out there, but majority of them, you're gonna end up using that firing order. Now I've got a display up here, and I wanna point some things out on here. It's basically a 6-cylinder engine. That's cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The little green circle is going to be your intake valve, and the pinkish red circle or purple circle is going to be your exhaust. So let's say we're trying to find out if cylinder number 1 is on top dead center. What we're going to do is the rule of 7, okay? So we're going to 1 plus X equals 7, so that's 1 plus 6. So we're going to come over here, we're going to put our hands on cylinder 6. We're going to bar the engine over, usually by hand, or crank it over. And as soon as you feel the exhaust valve close and the intake valve open, you know you're at top dead center TDC on cylinder 1. If you're on TDC in cylinder 1 and your firing order is 153624, you can actually adjust the intake exhaust of cylinder number 1. You can do your intake of cylinder number 2. You can do your intake of cylinder number 3. You can do your intake of cylinder number 4. And your intake of cylinder number 5. So if you're counting 1, 2, like if you're looking at the rockers on top, you would count 1, 2, and 3, 5, 7, 9. Once you get all those adjusted, you roll the engine over 360 degrees, then you can adjust the counterparts. So you would count the exhaust on cylinder 2, the exhaust on cylinder 3, the exhaust on cylinder 4, the exhaust on cylinder 5, the intake on cylinder 6, and the exhaust on cylinder 12. 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12. So if you can remember those numbers, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12, fantastic. What I used to do in the oil field, because we would do this every single 90 days, we'd have to do a PM, we'd have to check our adjustment or readjust them. I would mark the intake and exhaust on the TDC of number 1 with a paint pen, clean it out, brake clean, and mark them to where I pull the valve cover off. 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 9 were already marked with paint and made it good to go. Now, I actually do this method on every straight 6, whether I'm going to be back into it or not, just because when I'm actually adjusting it, it's very simple for me to remember which ones to adjust if I've already painted them. If you can't remember any part of this at all, the easy way to do it is the rule of 7, okay? 2 plus what equals 7? 2 plus 5, that's your companion cylinder. So if you want to be on TDC, if you want to find out where TDC on cylinder number 2 is, you need to be on overlap on cylinder 5. Roll the engine over until the exhaust is just about closed and the intake is just opening. And at that point, you shouldn't be able to grab the rocker and click the rocker, meaning there's no gap in between the rocker because you're in overlap. Once you're in overlap, you can do cylinder number 2. Cylinder number 3, again, what's the rule of 7? The companion cylinder is 4. 4 plus 3 is 7. So we're going to go the same thing. We're going to bar the engine over until we're in overlap in the exhaust and intake of 4. If you're trying to do number 5, 5 plus 2 is 7. We'd come over to number 2. And when we find our overlap on 2, that means we're TDC here, and 6 and 1. Once you're doing number 6, you're going to roll it over to your overlap at number 1. This is one of those things that's going to save you a tremendous amount of time if you can remember the 2-roll method. If you have a straight 6, or if you guys do a lot of fleet work or a lot of oil field work, anything with a straight 6, do this. Something else I learned in the oil field, we ran W12 Waukeshaws. Basically, it's a 6-cylinder on this side, a 6-cylinder on this side. So companion cylinders work the same. If you're working on this one, you'd on the cylinder number 1, bank number 1 on the front, you would put your number 6 cylinder on TDC and then go to the other side and do the same thing accordingly. That way you can adjust all the valves on a huge engine and just have to spin it over twice. Now, a way to cheat on this, and I've done this a lot of times, if you have access to the starter, in the oil field, usually on a straight 6, 3306, 3406, the starter's right by your knees. You reach down there with a screwdriver or get you a remote start button. And what you can do is you put I put my hand, like I'll say I'm adjusting number 1, I put my hand over on cylinder number 6, bump it, bump it, bump it, bump it until I feel the exhaust valve start to come up. And I would either finish barring it off by hand or try to bump it to where my number 6 cylinder was on overlap. Then I knew number 1. Another kind of cheater method to doing this, and this, I don't know why guys don't think this works, but if you can't remember anything at all, just bump the engine over until the opposing valve, like let's say you're on cylinder number 1, you're looking at the intake valve. Well, if the exhaust valve is all the way down, the intake valve cannot be loaded at all, so you can adjust that one. You can adjust your number 1, you mark it, wait till the intake valve's all the way down, and then look at your exhaust valve and you can adjust it. You can go down the entire cylinder doing it that way. That's another method. If you guys have any other suggestions, any other advice, put them down in the comments below. I hope this helps a lot of you guys. You can look this up. There's every manufacturer out there that has a straight 6, you know, Cummins, Caterpillar, all this, they have a little diagram that shows you just like that. You can see, you know, 1, 2, 3, and all the little numbers on there. And it's very easy to find. Save that in your phone or print it out and take it with you. I hope this helps explain how to adjust the valve lash on a 6-cylinder engine. One more piece of advice that I would give you guys, and this started a lot of arguments when I was in the oil field. In oil field engines, they run 24 hours a day, so therefore at 90 hours, or at 90 days rather, you'd have to do a preventive maintenance on them. According to the preventive maintenance, you are supposed to check valve lash. You're not supposed to set valve lash. There's a huge difference. If you're gonna go through, like on a Cummins or Caterpillar engine, check valve lash, which means take your feeler gauge and, you know, get it, use this 2-roll method, but slide the feeler gauge underneath your rocker, your lash cap or whatever, and check the clearance. Don't immediately go and loosen the jam nut and then the adjuster and then stick your feeler gauge underneath it and run your adjuster back down to set it. The reason is because if it was running and all the adjusters were all tight and ready to go, human error is a huge problem. Human error, you can go through, you can leave one nut loose or just barely loose, you know, like you kind of hand tightened it, and it will destroy the entire engine. Now that happened to me one time when I was working on a Caterpillar 3512, I think a 3516. We were doing the overhead, we ran through everything. I left one exhaust nut loose. So what happens when you do that, it changes what's called a scrubbing angle. When your rocker arm pushes down on your valve, it kind of scrubs the top of it a little bit, pushes off to the side. Well, if that adjuster starts loosening it up, all of a sudden that rocker arm gets loose, and it'll end up hammering into the valve, and it puts a lot of tension over on that valve just like that. And when you do that, it'll kind of bend the valve, and then gets stuck down in the cylinder, or worse, the valve will shear off the keeper on top, and then the valve goes down into the piston, and then you have catastrophic failure. That happened to me on one, and it cost about $85,000 for the mess up. It wiped out that cylinder, wiped out a couple of more cylinders somehow, wiped out both turbos on the engine, and it took us like a month to figure out some other gremlins that engine had, but that engine was down for a long time. So I don't think it's necessary to go through and adjust every single valve lash on every single engine. You need to check it. Just slide your feeler gauge underneath your rocker tip and see if it fits. If it doesn't, use a different feeler gauge, see if it's within spec. If it's within spec, leave it the hell alone. It's fine. There's no reason to loosen every single nut. You're inviting a problem to come into the engine at that point, and you're inviting more catastrophic failures later. So that's my 2 cents. If you guys disagree with me, let me know down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this little diagram. If you do, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and get out and get some stuff fixed.